Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here, and today I want to give you some updates on Ukraine, but we're not going to be talking necessarily about the military side of this. We're going to be talking about the cyber front. That's right, the cyber warfare that is going on there. There's an excellent article by Cyberscoop as well as some other sources, but I'm cribbing heavily from them on a lot of stuff that's going on with that. And Ukraine came out today, some of their top leaders on the cybersecurity, cyber warfare side, talking about this. So I want to get right to this because I think this is some really interesting stuff that everybody needs to hear, especially as we are just trying to keep up with the news left and right. We always have to make sure that, again, war is on multiple fronts. We've got a social media war, a cyber war going on top of the actual kinetic war, bombs and all of that, which apparently are intensifying. So anybody here that is possibly watching or listening to this in Ukraine that I've been talking to, please make sure you and your loved ones are safe. But here's what's going on the cyber front. Apparently, Ukraine's top government officials for the cyber effort are more focused on defense, not offense, according to one of their officials talking today. But the leaders are, quote unquote, grateful for the offensive actions taken by private hackers within Ukraine and also around the world. Quote, since every means and every scenario which will be used to weaken the military potential of Russian aggressors is useful. There you go. Now, who I'm talking about here is Viktor Zora. He is a deputy chairman of the State Service of Special Communications and Information Protection of Ukraine, talking to reporters in a briefing this past Tuesday that the Ukrainian government's cyber capabilities are focused on protecting its critical infrastructure and government services. Now, on a complete tangent to this, as I've mentioned before, it's always been really interesting to me that as essentially the bombing, etc., intensifies, overall the internet connection in Ukraine seems to be staying up. And basically intelligence analysts say, and they have been saying for a couple of weeks now, that the Russians actually need to use this as well. And I've talked about this, in various interviews, just obviously here on my podcast and video, on my radio show, all these kinds of things. So this is something I think that is really something interesting to note. Now, Mr. Zora referenced the quote-unquote IT Army, which is a broad collection of volunteers who have joined a Telegram channel that shares potential targets and updates on cyber issues such as possible distributed denial of service attacks, but he did not talk about offensive hacking efforts reportedly coordinated through the Ukrainian Defense Ministry in conjunction with Ukrainian cybersecurity experts, especially Igor Oshav, and that is again reported by Reuters today, Tuesday, the 15th of March. Now, Mr. Zora also said today that the IT Army volunteers are conducting their operations beside offensive actions. Quote, a lot of people are helping us in OSINT, that's open source intelligence. We're basically, and I continue to quote, in delivering of truth of real content on Russian war crimes in Ukraine to Russian audience, which hidden behind constant lies behind Russian media. Basically, what he's saying here is that essentially offensive hackers on the side of Ukraine, both in and out of country, have basically taken it to Russian infrastructure, meaning they are breaking through that state-run propaganda wall in Moscow and other major Russian cities, where much of the Russian population is getting their news from one source, which is the Putin-led government. If they're able to break through that, if they're able to deliver more information, that has the net effect of destabilizing essentially that particular region. So there we go. We'll see how effective that is. Now, Mr. Zora also said that it's too soon to assess the full damage from wiper malware that was made public this past Monday, yesterday, by cybersecurity firm ESET. And this is the third reported instance of wiper malware to target Ukrainian systems in recent weeks. Now, this particular malware yesterday was dubbed Caddy Wiper and was launched by Russians on, quote, already compromised systems, and that is according to the Ukrainian Computer Emergency Response Team posting on Facebook today as well. Now, there's just one confirmed basically infection of this particular wiper, according to Mr. Zora, and I quote, but we are confident there will be more. The attackers were focused on a financial organization, according to him, but they didn't offer additional details. Obviously, wiper malware is a huge problem. So instead of locking out your data like ransom where they want to pay, obviously Russian intelligence and their cutouts would be moving as fast as they could to damage or destroy infrastructure And so wiper malware does exactly what you think it does, wipes things out, particularly data. So there you go. Now, Mr. Zora also told reporters that a cyber attack on a satellite network connected with broadband and satellite internet in Ukraine in the hours before the invasion resulted in, and I quote, a huge loss in communications in the very beginning of the war, and they didn't offer more details. Now, this attack, I actually spoke about this on Sunday in Breaches of the Week, because this is coming from one of the largest satellite providers in the world, known as Viasat, and their Ka-sat satellites, and those are currently under investigation by several Western, not Russian intelligence agencies, and that's according to Reuters on March 11th. I talked about that in Breaches of the Week because, again, we didn't have confirmation like we do today of that, but apparently that they are caught up in this entire situation and their satellites have been knocked offline. We were suspecting it had something to do with this, given satellite infrastructure is heavily in use in the theater of war right now, so that's a huge thing. Now, Mr. Zora also said on Tuesday that the Ukrainian government needs more evidence and details to officially attribute the attack, basically, which they will be sending to international crime courts for this, and I quote, "I don't need any additional proofs that Russia was targeting Viasat as well as other companies. We understand they're focusing on satellite communications, they're focusing on ISPs, they're focusing on mobile operators to destroy infrastructure and prevent Ukrainian armed forces from being able to effectively communicate." Now, that is a bit of a shift from other, again, previous intel, that I talked about literally earlier just here in this video/podcast, again, also on my radio show, that essentially they are trying to keep it up. I think what's ending up happening is that the Russians may be, if they are starting to launch more ferocious attacks against the internet infrastructure, is that they are now deeming it more important to knock out the Ukrainians' ability to communicate than rather have that double-edged sword, meaning the Russians get to use the infrastructure for the internet, but because it's up, so do the Ukrainians. And we have seen millions of pictures, images, videos, because anybody with an internet connection and a mobile phone can become instantly a citizen journalist in a war zone. And that is something that we are seeing. No longer do we have to wait for the BBCs and CNNs to report when there's so much live getting pumped out on social media. So that is obviously a huge, huge thing. And I think the Russians are now changing their tone if they're going, basically through this, which will make communication in and out of Ukraine much harder. So there you go. Some other news outside of that on the kinetic warfare side is that some intelligence analysts are reporting or believing that the supply chains of Russia are so basically stretched and screwed up right now that the Russians may only have about 10 days logistically to actually effectively try to take over Kyiv, Kharkiv, and some of the other major cities before their supply chains, which are at about 90 miles from the border right now, are kept up. Russian troops are actually losing or not getting the food and equipment that they need to continue to sustain this war. And, quite frankly, from Ukraine's perspective, that's a really good thing. So we'll see what goes on. The Ukrainians have obviously been just basically running a ferocious battle to keep their cities right now. Bombing is intensifying everywhere. But on top of just the horrific images we are seeing in bombings and obviously the war going on, understand on the back end of this, we have a whole bunch of cyber operators doing a whole bunch of different things, both in and out of country, for and against Ukraine, for and against Russia, and this war continues to rage on. This also just happens to be a cyber war that we've been in with Russia for a decade and nobody's talking about, and I'll have an article soon published on that probably in the next week or two. So there you go. That is your news of the day, and I will keep you up to date as best I can, but that is your Ukraine cyber warfare news of, I guess, the day, because tomorrow is a whole new problem. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please stay private. Thanks, everyone.